Don't choose the fat one. She will ruin your legacy. But the Vampire King knelt before the rejected. The grand hall of the Vampire King's castle shimmered under a sea of candlelight. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars, reflecting the golden glow across the marble floors. Nobles from every corner of the kingdom had gathered, their silks rustling and whispers echoing off the high ceilings. Tonight was the selection ceremony, a night where the king would choose his bride. And yet, among all the noblewomen presented, one figure drew no admiration. Elara stood at the edge of the hall, her heart pounding. Her gown, though carefully made, did little to hide the softness of her figure, and whispers from the crowd followed her like a shadow. "Don't choose the fat one," they muttered. "She will ruin the king's legacy." She heard the words, but she held her head high. For years she had learned to carry herself with quiet strength, even as the world mocked her. Her pale hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the folds of her gown. She was not vain. She had never wished to be the center of attention. Still, the weight of expectation pressed down on her chest like a heavy cloak. Every eye in the hall seemed to judge her, measuring her worth in ways she had long ago learned to ignore. And yet, tonight, the scrutiny stung more sharply than ever. The Vampire King entered the hall like a shadow carved into human form. His robes of deep crimson and black trailed behind him, and his presence silenced the room instantly. Tall, commanding, and impossibly elegant, he moved with a grace that betrayed his centuries of life. His eyes, dark and fathomless, swept over the assembled women, lingering only for a moment before flicking away. Elara's stomach knotted. She had heard rumors about the king, how he chose brides not for beauty alone, but for strength of character. But strength had never protected her from ridicule, and here, in the brilliance of the grand hall, she felt herself shrinking under the weight of every whispered judgment. One by one, the king passed the noblewomen, eyes sharp and calculating. Some curtsied too eagerly, others trembled with fear. Each step he took made Elara's chest tighten, as though the shadows themselves pressed closer to her. And yet, when his gaze finally swept past her, he did not stop. He did not smile, nod, or acknowledge her presence. The cold, silent dismissal was more cutting than any words could have been. Elara's cheeks burned, and for a moment she felt the sting of humiliation. The nobles around her exchanged satisfied glances, some smirking with relief. She had been right, she was unwanted. She had expected as much, yet the ache of rejection pierced deeper than she had anticipated. Retreating from the hall, she slipped through a side door and into the castle gardens. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of jasmine and the faint tang of the river that ran beside the castle walls. Moonlight spilled across the marble fountain at the center, and Elara sank onto its edge, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had always been different. Others had mocked her, judged her by her appearance, or dismissed her because she did not fit the narrow mold of courtly beauty. But she had something they did not, a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos, a heart that refused to bow to fear, and a strength that had carried her through years of solitude. Yet here, under the pale glow of the moon, she wondered if strength alone could protect her from a world that had already condemned her. Her thoughts wandered to the king, to the icy gaze that had passed over her without recognition. Why did it hurt so much? Was it the rejection itself, or the hope that had dared to bloom in her chest against reason? A rustle of leaves drew her attention. She turned sharply, expecting a guard or perhaps a servant, but the figure that emerged from the shadows was neither. The Vampire King himself stepped into the moonlight, his presence commanding even here in the quiet of the garden. His dark eyes, deep as a bottomless well, fixed on her. "Elara," he said, his voice low and smooth, carrying the weight of centuries. She froze, unable to speak. How did he know her name? None of the nobles in the hall had mentioned it, and yet here he was, calling to her as though he had known her all her life. She began, but the words caught in her throat. He knelt before her, not in mockery, not in ceremony, but with a reverence that made her heart stutter. The cold marble beneath him did not seem to bother him. His gaze never wavered, steady and piercing, as if he could see every secret she had tried to hide. "You are not what they see," he whispered, the words carrying a weight she could feel in her bones. "You are what I need." Alara's breath caught. The hall, the whispers, the stinging rejection, it all seemed to fade into the night air. She had been dismissed, scorned, and ridiculed, yet here he knelt, speaking words that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. Why me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling between disbelief and hope. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, a single gloved hand hovering near hers. "Because you possess something they cannot measure," he said finally. "Something ancient, powerful, and true. The kingdom needs it, and I need you." Alara shook her head, overwhelmed. "I am nothing. They call me fat, useless, a mistake. How could you?" He raised a hand to gently lift her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are more than they ever will understand, and it is their blindness, not your worth, that has led them to mock you." For the first time in her life, Alara felt a spark of something she had long denied herself: hope, and alongside it, a flicker of courage. If this man, this king, could see her value when the world could not, perhaps she could finally see it too. But even as she leaned into the warmth of his words, doubt lingered at the edges of her heart. The court had already judged her. The nobles would not accept her presence easily. And the king, though he knelt before her now, was a being of immense power, centuries of wisdom, and perhaps secrets she could not yet comprehend. She began again, searching for words that could capture the storm of emotion within her. But before she could finish, a loud crash echoed from the hall, followed by frantic shouts. The sound cut through the night like a blade. The king's expression darkened instantly. He rose with fluid grace, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the garden. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice sharp but controlled. "Do not move." Alara nodded, though her heart hammered with fear. She watched as he disappeared into the darkness, moving like a shadow among shadows. Alone, she felt a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The rejection of the hall seemed a distant memory, replaced by something far more compelling, a sense that her life, her destiny, was shifting in ways she could barely comprehend. The moonlight bathed the garden in silver, illuminating the fountain and the flowers that swayed gently in the night breeze. Alara touched the cool marble, grounding herself. She had been scorned, dismissed, and mocked. Yet somehow the world had shifted. The vampire king had seen her, not as the fat, rejected girl the court whispered about, but as someone rare, someone vital. Her mind wandered to the king's words, "You are what I need." They echoed in her mind, a promise, a challenge, a mystery she was not yet ready to unravel. And then, as the wind carried the faint sound of footsteps returning from the hall, Alara understood one thing clearly: her life was no longer her own. It had been thrust into a realm of shadow, power, and destiny, a world where the whispers of nobles mattered less than the strength of her heart and the courage of her spirit. She stood at the fountain's edge, moonlight glinting on her hair, her resolve hardening. Whatever awaited her in the castle, whatever dangers or secrets lay hidden in the dark corners of the vampire king's world, she would face them. She would not cower. She would not be dismissed again. The last sound of the night came from the fountain itself, water shimmering like liquid silver. And beneath it, Alara felt a pulse, not of fear, but of something deep and powerful, as though the very magic of the castle and her own hidden strength had awakened at last. Somewhere in the shadows, the king returned, his cloak brushing the stone floor. He knelt once more, closer this time, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on her. "Do you understand?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the weight of promise and command alike. Alara nodded, a quiet determination rising within her. She had been rejected, but she had not been defeated. The world had scorned her, whispered that she would ruin legacies, and mocked her very being. Yet here he was, the vampire king, kneeling before her, seeing her for who she truly was. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Perhaps the world's judgment was never meant to define her. Perhaps her destiny was far greater than she had ever dared to imagine. The moonlight wrapped around them both, a silver cloak of fate. The garden, once a place of solitude and shame, now felt alive with possibility. Ilara's heart beat steadily, strong and defiant. She was no longer just the fat girl the court scorned. She was seen, chosen, and, though she did not yet fully understand it, needed. And the night was only the beginning. The morning sun had not yet risen, but the castle gardens were already alive with soft, silver light. Moonlight still lingered in the shadows, tracing the outlines of the fountains and the tall, twisting hedges. Ilara walked slowly among the paths, her mind replaying the events of the previous night. The memory of the vampire king kneeling before her, his dark eyes holding both command and reverence, refused to fade. She had expected humiliation, rejection, even scorn. Instead, she had been seen. And it left her feeling unsteady, as if the very foundation of her life had shifted in a single night. Ilara knew she could not remain at the edge of the world any longer. She could no longer hide in shadows, content to watch others live while she endured their whispers. The king had stirred something inside her, a spark of courage, and perhaps something deeper, something that felt like destiny calling. The soft rustle of footsteps drew her attention. She turned to see the king approaching, moving with the same quiet power he carried through the halls. There was no ceremony, no guards flanking him, just the two of them alone in the early light. "Do you sleep?" he asked, his voice low, yet carrying a curious warmth. Ilara shook her head. "Not well, I cannot stop thinking." He smiled faintly, a shadow of amusement crossing his otherwise stoic features. "Nor can I," he admitted. "I have seen many in this hall, yet there is something different, something unyielding, courage even in fear. That is rare." She felt her cheeks warm under his gaze, a mixture of embarrassment and pride. She had always been underestimated. Even her own reflection had often seemed a stranger, whispering doubts she had learned to carry alone. And yet here, someone of unimaginable power spoke to her as an equal, recognizing something she had barely understood about herself. "Why me?" she asked again, the question trembling from her lips. "Why not one of the others, perfect and graceful and admired?" He stopped and studied her, his eyes as deep as the night sky. "Because perfection is hollow. The world praises it, fears it, even worships it, but it has no heart. You have heart. And more than that, you have something they cannot see, a power hidden within you. A fire that could change everything." Ilara blinked, taken aback. Power, fire, she had always felt herself ordinary, even forgotten. I do not understand," she whispered. "You will," he said softly. "If you choose to see it, you will, but it will not be easy. The path ahead is shadowed, dangerous, and you may not trust yourself at first." Ilara considered this, a mixture of fear and excitement curling in her chest. She had always been alone, her only companions the whispered judgments of the world and her quiet determination to survive. And now, this king, this being of centuries, was offering her a glimpse of something far greater than survival, something that might even define her destiny. "You will begin today," he continued, "not as a subject of the court, but as someone I wish to understand, to protect, and perhaps to trust." The words were heavy with promise, yet they carried a challenge. Trust was difficult. Fear lingered. And yet, something deep inside her stirred, a recognition that she was ready to step forward. The first days passed in a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. The king brought her into private chambers and libraries that most courtiers had never seen. Ancient tomes lined the walls, their leather spines etched with symbols older than any living memory. Candles flickered, casting long shadows across the floors as he instructed her in knowledge both arcane and practical. Ilara learned quickly. She absorbed the lessons, not just with her mind but with her heart. She discovered that she could sense energy, the flow of magic through the castle and its lands. At first it was faint, a shimmer of light beneath her hands, a whisper at the edge of her hearing. But as days passed, it grew stronger, more insistent, and she realized it was tied to her own bloodline, a lineage she had barely known existed. The king watched her silently at first, then began guiding her more directly. "You have a gift," he said one evening as they stood before a moonlit window overlooking the forest. "But gifts are like fire, they can warm or they can burn. You must learn control and you must learn trust." Alara nodded, though her heart quivered. The weight of this power was exhilarating yet terrifying. What if she failed? What if her fire brought ruin instead of strength? And yet she could not turn away. She had never felt so alive, so certain that her life, her true purpose, was finally unfolding. The court, meanwhile, was not idle. Rumors began to spread, whispers of the rejected girl who had captured the king's attention. Some nobles whispered warnings, fearful that her influence would disrupt centuries of tradition. Others gossiped with thinly veiled contempt. "She cannot hold power," they said. "Her body, her bloodline, she is not suited to the throne." Alara heard some of these whispers, though she tried to ignore them. At first, they stung, reminding her of every insult she had endured since childhood. But gradually, she felt the whispers lose their power over her. She had seen herself reflected in the king's eyes, and that reflection was stronger, braver, and wiser than the court's shallow judgments. One night, as she practiced channeling her magic under the king's watchful eye, a strange sensation overcame her. A pulse of energy surged from her hands, stronger than anything she had felt before. The candles flickered, shadows dancing wildly across the walls, and she felt a connection not just to her own power but to the castle itself. "You are awakening," the king said softly, his voice steady amidst the chaos. "Do you feel it? This energy, it is part of you, part of your lineage, and it is linked to the kingdom's fate. Your strength will guide it, protect it, and perhaps even transform it." Alara's heart raced. This was more than magic. It was responsibility, destiny, and a promise she had yet to fully understand. But it was also thrilling. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, her spirit no longer confined by the judgment of others. Days turned into weeks. With each lesson, with each whispered conversation in the quiet of the castle, Alara grew closer to the king. Their connection was not romantic, at least not yet, but it was profound. They shared thoughts, fears, and secrets that none of the courtiers could ever imagine. The king revealed fragments of his past, centuries of solitude, battles, betrayals, and a relentless pursuit of a legacy he feared could be lost. Alara listened, fascinated, understanding the weight of his power and the burdens he carried. And yet she also recognized the loneliness beneath his strength, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "You are not alone here," he said one evening, as the sun set behind the mountains. "And I will not allow the court or the world to define your worth. You define it yourself. And you have already shown more courage than many centuries of rulers." Alara's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, to embrace the strength he saw in her, but doubt lingered as it always did. Could she truly stand beside a being of such power? Could she wield the forces awakening within her without losing herself? Before she could answer, a sharp sound echoed through the castle corridors, a warning bell. Instinctively, she turned toward the door, senses alert. The king's expression darkened. "Trouble," he said. "The court does not take kindly to change, nor do those who fear it." The day had come when whispers became action. A faction of nobles, jealous and fearful, had conspired to challenge her presence. They stormed into the gardens, their robes fluttering and their faces twisted with anger. "You," one noblewoman hissed, pointing directly at Alara, "you dare claim influence over the king? You, the rejected girl, do you know what you have done?" Alara's hands rose instinctively, not in fear but in readiness. The magic she had barely begun to control shimmered faintly around her fingers, like moonlight captured in glass. The nobles faltered, startled by the power that radiated from her. The king stepped beside her, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of a ceremonial dagger at his waist. "Step back," he commanded, his voice calm but lethal. "She is under my protection." Gasps and mutters rippled through the group. Alara felt a surge of strength, not from fear but from determination. She would not bow, she would not shrink. She would stand as she always had, and she would face whatever opposition came her way. "You do not know me," she said, her voice steady, "and yet you judge me. I am no one's shadow, no one's pawn. I am Alara, and I will not be dismissed again." The nobles froze. Their whispers, their sneers, lost their power against the force of her voice and the magic that danced faintly around her. The king's eyes met hers, a flicker of pride passing through his dark gaze. And in that moment, Alara understood something profound. She had begun to awaken, not just her magic, but the strength within herself, the courage that had lain dormant beneath years of scorn. And the world, whether it wished to accept her or not, would have to see her as she truly was. The night air shimmered with promise. The stars overhead seemed to pulse in response to the power stirring in her veins. And as the king placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, Alara realized that her life, her destiny, and the fate of the kingdom were now intertwined. The court would try to test her. They would whisper, conspire, and challenge her at every turn. But she would rise, stronger with each trial, braver with each encounter. The fire within her had awakened, and nothing, not the judgment of nobles, nor the shadow of fear, could extinguish it. And somewhere deep in the castle, in the shadows of ancient halls, Alara knew that her connection with the Vampire King was no longer a mere chance. It was destiny. A bond that would shape the kingdom, transform her life, and perhaps even change the course of history. The castle corridors were silent, but the air felt heavy, thick with whispers that had not yet reached the ears of the court. Alara moved carefully through the hallways, her fingers brushing the carved stone walls as though seeking reassurance. The confrontation in the gardens had changed everything. She could feel the eyes of the nobles on her, even when they pretended to ignore her presence. Their jealousy and fear were palpable. The king walked beside her, his presence a calm but commanding force. Though he did not speak, Alara felt the weight of his watchful gaze. Every step they took together seemed to echo the unspoken promise he had made to her. She was protected, no matter the cost. Yet the court was not idle. Behind closed doors, the nobles whispered, plotting to undermine her. Their fear of her rising influence had festered into anger, and now they were determined to remove her before her power could grow too strong. They called her the rejected one behind her back, laughing at the very idea that she could rival their carefully built reputations. Alara sensed it all. Even without seeing their scheming faces, she could feel the tension, the sharp undercurrent of malice that threatened to sweep her from her place at the king's side. Her magic stirred instinctively, subtle and untamed, as though warning her of the dangers to come. "You must be cautious," the king said at last, his voice low, almost a whisper. "The court does not forgive those who challenge its order. And some will stop at nothing to see you humiliated." Alara nodded. She had been careful all her life, but this was different. She was no longer just surviving in the shadows. She was rising into the light, and the light always draws attention, for better or worse. "I am ready," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her tone. "I will not hide any more." He studied her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Then you must also be prepared for betrayal," he warned. "Not all who smile in the hall are your allies. Some wear masks, and even friends may falter when faced with fear or desire for power." Alara swallowed, her stomach tightening. Betrayal was not unfamiliar to her. She had learned long ago that the world could be cruel, that those who claimed loyalty could turn in an instant. But now, standing at the threshold of the court's intrigue, she understood that this betrayal would not be about survival alone. It would test her courage, her magic, and her very sense of self. That evening, the court gathered once more in the grand hall. The chandeliers sparkled, throwing fractured light across the polished floors, and the nobles took their seats with careful formality. Alara entered behind the king, her gown flowing like a river of deep midnight, and felt the tension in the room thicken. Eyes flicked toward her, some filled with curiosity, others with open hostility. A nobleman, one of the king's longtime advisers, rose abruptly. His voice carried easily across the hall. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply but with a sharpness in his tone, "I must speak. There are concerns regarding this girl you have chosen to favor. Her lineage is unknown, her influence untested. The people fear her, Your Majesty, and her power, it may be dangerous." A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Alara's stomach sank, but she held her head high. She had anticipated this, had prepared herself for the court's disapproval, yet hearing it spoken aloud brought a chill to her chest. The king's eyes were calm, unwavering as they fixed on the nobleman. "Do you doubt me?" he asked, his tone smooth but edged with steel. "Or do you simply fear change?" the man faltered, caught between respect and ambition. "I fear only for the kingdom, Your Majesty," he said cautiously. The king's gaze shifted to Alara, and she felt a surge of warmth and strength in his look. "Then let her prove herself," he said, "not through words whispered in these halls, but through actions. If she fails, then judgment can be passed, but until that time she stands protected." Gasps and mutters followed his declaration. Some nobles scowled, others whispered angrily among themselves. The court had not expected defiance, and certainly not from the king himself. But even as tension hung in the air, Alara felt something deep within her awaken. The court might despise her, fear her, or doubt her, but she had a power that they could not deny, and she would wield it with courage. That night the castle felt different. Shadows stretched longer in the hallways, and the wind outside carried the faint sound of the river running through the valley. Alara could feel her magic humming beneath her skin, a constant pulse that demanded attention. She had begun to understand that her power was tied not just to herself, but to the kingdom itself. Every corridor, every stone, seemed alive with energy responding to her presence. As she moved through the castle to her chambers, she heard whispers behind closed doors. Courtiers were speaking her name, their voices sharp and calculating. Their words carried venom and fear. "She will ruin everything. The king's judgment is clouded. We cannot allow her to rise." Alara clenched her fists, feeling the magic flare in response. She could sense their intentions, their plotting, their desire to see her humiliated. She had always known the world could be cruel, but now she was ready to face it head-on. The next morning, she found the king waiting for her in the training hall. The room was large and echoing, filled with the scent of waxed wood and old stone. He gestured for her to step forward. "Today," he said, "you will face your first real test, not in words but in action. The court will not believe your strength until they see it." Alara nodded, determination lighting her eyes. She did not fully understand what the test would be, but she trusted him. Trust was a dangerous thing, yet with the king it felt natural, like breathing or walking under the open sky. The test was subtle at first. He had arranged a series of challenges that combined intellect, courage, and magic. Each obstacle revealed a hidden truth about herself. She had to navigate the castle's secret passages, unlock ancient doors, and channel her magic to illuminate hidden symbols that told the story of the kingdom's history. With each task, Alara felt herself growing stronger. The fear that had haunted her for years began to dissolve, replaced by a steady confidence. She realized that she was capable not only of survival but of mastery, and that the whispers of the court could no longer define her. But even as she proved herself, the threat of betrayal loomed. That evening, as she returned to her chambers, she discovered a note slipped beneath the door. Written in sharp, elegant script, it read, "Do not trust him. He will abandon you when the time comes. Your power will be your undoing. Alara's heart pounded. The warning was clear, but so was the intention: fear, manipulation, and intimidation. Someone was trying to shake her, to make her doubt herself. But instead of fear, she felt resolve. Her power was real, her courage undeniable, and she would not be swayed by whispers or threats. The king arrived shortly after, sensing her unease. He read the note, his eyes narrowing. "This is the work of those who cannot accept what they do not understand," he said. "But you are stronger than their fear. Do not let them dictate your path." Alara nodded. "I will not," she said firmly. "I will face whatever comes." That night a shadow moved through the castle halls, a figure cloaked in black, attempting to test her defenses, to probe the limits of her strength. But Alara, her senses sharpened and her magic awakened, was ready. The figure faltered as she confronted it, a flicker of light radiating from her hands, revealing both the intruder and her command of power. The intruder retreated, unseen by the rest of the castle, leaving a clear message. Alara was no longer a girl to be underestimated. She was awakening, her strength undeniable, and the kingdom would soon take notice. As the days passed, the tension in the court increased. Rumors of her power and the king's favor spread like wildfire. Some nobles attempted to sow further dissent, challenging her in subtle ways, testing her knowledge, her patience, even her courage in front of the king. But each challenge only strengthened her resolve. She began to understand that her path would never be easy, yet it was hers to walk, and she would not falter. And through it all, the king remained at her side, not as a guardian alone, but as a companion in understanding, a mentor in the awakening of her power. Their bond grew quietly, a mixture of trust, respect, and an unspoken connection that neither fully acknowledged but both felt deeply. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the castle in golden shadow, Alara stood on the balcony overlooking the forest. The wind tousled her hair, and she felt the pulse of magic flowing through the land, through the kingdom itself. She realized then that her awakening was not just personal, it was tied to something far greater than herself. The nobles would continue to plot. Betrayal would not cease, but Alara was no longer the rejected one. She had begun to awaken, not just to power but to purpose, and the world, the court, and even the shadows themselves would have to reckon with her strength. From the darkness, the king's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "You are ready," he said softly. "But remember, strength is not just power. It is courage, trust, and the willingness to face betrayal without losing yourself." Alara nodded, feeling the weight and promise of his words. She had been scorned, rejected, and tested, but she had survived. She had awakened. And whatever lay ahead, whether betrayal, danger, or a challenge beyond imagination, she would face it with courage, her heart and power united. The night stretched endlessly, filled with possibilities, and as the castle lay in quiet anticipation, one truth became undeniable. Alara was no longer a shadow. She was awakening, and the kingdom would soon know her name. And somewhere deep in the castle, in the hidden chambers and echoing halls, a dark force stirred. The awakening of her power had not gone unnoticed. The challenge was far from over. The castle had grown silent, its corridors and halls holding a tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Outside, the moon hung low, casting silver light over the forests and rivers that surrounded the fortress. Within, a storm was stirring, not of wind or rain, but of magic, of power awakened, and of destiny about to collide. Alara stood at the edge of the balcony, the night air cool against her skin. Her gown, dark as midnight, clung to her with the weight of expectation and resolve. In the distance, the forest whispered secrets she could almost understand, and the pulse of her magic thrummed in rhythm with the earth itself. She had come far since the night the king had first knelt before her, acknowledging her hidden strength. She had grown, learned, and faced trials that would have broken others, and now She was ready for the greatest challenge of all. The Vampire King joined her, his presence commanding yet gentle. He did not speak immediately, allowing her to feel the stillness between them, the calm before the storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, carrying centuries of power, responsibility, and care. "They know we are ready," he said, eyes fixed on the dark horizon where the first stirrings of a curse began to show. "The nobles who plotted against you, they are only the surface. The true threat lies deeper, ancient magic tied to the kingdom, awakened by your power." Alara nodded, her heart steady. "I understand," she said. "I am ready to face it." The king placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "No one else can face this with the courage you have shown. The kingdom and I will follow your lead, but you must trust yourself fully." "You must trust me." "I do," she whispered. The words were not spoken lightly. They carried all the trials, all the awakenings, and all the nights of doubt and discovery. She had learned to trust herself, to wield her power, and to see beyond fear and judgment. Now she placed that trust in the man who had first seen her worth when the world had rejected her. The curse revealed itself slowly at first, a tremor in the castle stones, a shadow creeping along the walls, moving with a life of its own. It was ancient, older than any living memory, tied to the royal bloodline and the kingdom itself. When it moved through the halls, the torches flickered violently, and a chill swept through even the most guarded chambers. The king and Alara moved through the castle, hand in hand, ready to face what no one else dared confront. They descended into the underground chambers, where the oldest magic of the kingdom slumbered in silence, waiting to be awakened. "You feel it?" the king asked softly. "The curse is alive. It reacts to your presence." Alara closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself. She let her power flow freely, intertwining with the pulse of the kingdom. Energy shimmered along her arms and fingers, subtle yet strong. She felt the curse as something alive and watching, testing, questioning whether she was worthy of facing it. "I feel it," she said. "It's angry, confused, but I know it's not evil. It only wants acknowledgement." The king's eyes softened. "Then show it your strength. Show it your courage, and it may yet be tamed." With that, Alara stepped forward. She focused all her energy, all her courage, and let her magic flow outward in a gentle but firm wave. Shadows twisted and shifted around her, responding to the strength in her voice, her presence, and her heart. The curse tested her, sending visions of failure, fear, and loss, but she did not falter. She faced each illusion with unwavering resolve. "You are stronger than I imagined," the king said, standing beside her, lending the weight of his own power to her side. Together, they formed a force neither fear nor ancient magic could break. The confrontation reached its climax in the central chamber, where the oldest magic of the kingdom pulsed like a heart. Shadows twisted into shapes, whispering threats and doubts, creating illusions of betrayal and despair. The nobles who had plotted against her appeared as ghostly figures, their voices mocking, attempting to undermine her courage. Alara faced them all, her power glowing brighter than the shadows around her. "I am not the rejected one," she declared, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "I am Alara. I am strong. I am the kingdom's protector, and I will not be broken by fear, by lies, or by whispers." The shadows recoiled as her words filled the chamber. Magic responded to truth, to courage, and to resolve. The illusions shattered, leaving only the glowing pulse of the ancient curse. And then, as she extended her hands, a wave of energy spread outward, calm yet commanding. The curse, once dark and threatening, shifted. Its power intertwined with hers, acknowledging her strength, and then it settled, silent and still. The king exhaled slowly, his eyes shining with pride. "You have done it," he said. "You have faced what no one else could, and you have emerged not only unbroken but stronger. The kingdom is safe. You have earned your place." Alara felt her knees weaken, but she did not fall. The exhaustion was physical, yes, but it was also the release of years of fear and doubt. She had faced rejection, betrayal, and darkness, And now she stood triumphant, her power fully awakened, her courage undeniable. In the days that followed, the court's attitude began to change. Nobles who had opposed her could no longer deny her strength and influence. Some apologized quietly, others accepted her silently, and a few remained bitter but powerless against the truth she had proven. Ilara walked through the halls with confidence, her presence commanding yet graceful, her power recognized and respected. The king watched her closely, pride and admiration evident in every glance. Their bond, tested and strengthened by trials, had grown into something deeper. Not merely trust, not merely respect, but a connection forged in courage, magic, and shared destiny. "You have changed everything," he said one evening as they stood on the balcony overlooking the forest. The stars reflected in his dark eyes, and his hand found hers, holding it gently but firmly. "Not just the kingdom, but me." Ilara looked at him, her heart full. "We have changed together," she said. "I would not be here without you, and yet I would not have been ready without facing what I faced." He smiled, a rare and warm expression that made her pulse quicken. "You are stronger than you know, braver than anyone could have imagined, and far more important than the court will ever understand." Ilara leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady heartbeat of the king beside her, and the rhythm of her own pulse intertwined with magic, courage, and destiny. She had once been the rejected one, scorned and mocked. Now she was the queen's equal, the protector of the kingdom, and a woman who had discovered her true power. Yet, even in the quiet of victory, the air carried the faintest whisper of danger. Ancient forces had been stirred, the magic of the kingdom had awakened, and the shadows had not fully disappeared. But Ilara did not fear them. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it. And she would face whatever came, hand in hand with the king who had first seen her worth, who had knelt before her when the world had rejected her, and who now stood as her equal in power, respect, and devotion. Together they walked through the moonlit halls, a silent promise between them that no darkness, no betrayal, no whisper of fear could ever undo. The kingdom was safe, not because the shadows were gone, but because they had learned to face them, and to rise stronger than before. The stars reflected in the castle windows, the river below glimmered in silver, and the night itself seemed to hum with a quiet approval. Ilara's journey from rejection to triumph was complete, but the story of her life, her love, and her reign had only just begun. As she stood with the king on the highest balcony, looking out over the kingdom she had saved and protected, she felt a sense of peace and readiness. Whatever trials awaited them, they would face them together. The whispers of the past could no longer touch her, for she had embraced her power, her courage, and her destiny. The night wind carried the faintest echo of the magic she had awakened, a reminder that some forces could never truly be tamed. And yet she smiled, knowing she was no longer the girl who had been scorned. She was Ilara, queen, protector, and hero of her own story. And the king, kneeling before no one now but standing with her as an equal, whispered softly, "The world may have rejected you, but I never will. Never." Ilara reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "And I will never forget that. Together, we are stronger than any darkness." The moonlight bathed them in silver, the kingdom slept beneath them, and for the first time in centuries, the castle felt alive not with fear, but with hope, courage, and the promise of a new beginning.